The presumption of innocence is the legal principle that one is considered innocent until proven guilty. It is a legal right of the accused in a criminal trial and an international human right under Article 11 under the UN's Universal Declaration. But in this country,
Trinidad system is like guilty until proven innocent. It's the total opposite.
Akili Charles knows the feeling all too well. On May 21st, the 39-year-old walked free after spending 9 years on remand. In 2010, Charles was asleep when dozens of police officers barged into his Covine Road, Diego Martin home in the early hours of the morning and ripped him from the arms of his 3-year-old daughter. After 8 days of interrogation, Charles was charged alongside 5 others for the murder of Russell Antwine, a CPEP worker. The then president of a community youth organization and forestry worker thought it would have been over soon, but days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years.
Not nice. Prison, I wouldn't wish prison on my worst enemy.
Charles was assigned to the Port of Spain prison, where he was placed in a 6x9 cell with 5 other men. With only 3 beds available, he slept on the ground with just a thin sheet separating him from the cold floor in close proximity to drains littered with urine and feces. The conditions were unlike anything he had ever imagined, and just when he thought things couldn't get any worse, they did.
We were before Marcia Caesar, before the whole Marcia Caesar fiasco thing. And Marcia Caesar took from 2010 to 2017 on our matter.
On April 26, 2017, Charles and his chargees walked into a Port of Spain magistrate's court, and after 7 years of court appearances, Deputy Chief Magistrate Maria Busby Earl Cattle delivered an instruction that resulted in riots.
Ms. Busby stood up and she said she was instructed to start over our matters because the other magistrate apparently got a promotion or whatever, and our matters have to start over. So this is going to frustrate a lot of people because after you've been in prison 7 years, where you're finding lawyer money to pay a new lawyer now to start over your case, to start over your matter and this kind of stuff. I know this is going to be, if it already takes 7 years, how long this new trial, this is the kind of thoughts you have and how long this new trial going to take.
While the magistrate assigned to their matter was elevated to the Supreme Court, the hopes of freedom hinged on 53 part-heard matters were dashed. Charles, Israel Lara, Chiqui Portillo, Anton Cambridge, Kareem Gomez and Levi Joseph would sit in remand for another year and 6 months, with no word on when their case would be called or if they'd be able to go home. These men, all presumed innocent, would return to the confines of the Trinidad and Tobago Prison Service, where close to 2/3 of the prison population are either awaiting trial before the courts or in the process of appeal. For those before the courts, every appearance offers a glimmer of hope, but Charles explains how it quickly turns into frustration.
Sometimes we go to court and it's just like, before the magistrate, and it's like, they discuss one issue and it's, okay, 21 days. And back downstairs, you even spend 5 minutes in court. 5 minutes in a courtroom after you wait 21 days to appear in court. Sometimes 2 minutes less. Sometimes you just reach upstairs and they give you a date, 21 days, you didn't even talk about nothing in your matter. Date, adjournment. And this is the court system we have.
In the 9 years he spent behind bars, Charles has come to understand the link between angry inmates kept in inhumane conditions and death, Remandees returning from the courts in the worst of moods, having received yet another postponement, are locked in overcrowded cells, served unsavory diets in the poorest of conditions amid unlimited uncertainty. The dejection suffered, he says, can be alleviated by a simple call to loved ones. Cigarettes, even weed, items all prohibited behind prison walls. Prison officers trying to crack down on contraband are met with strong resistance. Charles has witnessed raids that resulted in fights and eventually death.
I believe the officers are meant to pay for the inadequacies of the court system. Because when these prisoners come back to the prisons frustrated and angry, it's the officers they're seeing, it's the officers going to have to deal with them. So the prison officers, they have a very hard job.
The hopes and dreams of thousands of citizens on remand are disintegrating, along with deteriorating remand facilities. Persons are entering the prison system far faster than the judicial system can process, and more inmates are accepting guilty pleas to escape the conditions and uncertainty of remand. But for those who chose to fight for their innocence, their experience has been described as hell.
Good day, my name is Anita. I've been in prison for the last 15 years and 5 months without a trial.
Of the 9 facilities under the purview of the Trinidad and Tobago Prison Service, there is only one dedicated solely to the containment of remandees. Located in Golden Grove, Arouca, this old prison was originally configured to house 600 inmates, but currently holds just over 1,000. The spillover is so great that the prison service has moved high-risk remandees to the maximum security prison and the Eastern Correctional Rehabilitation Center, the only 2 prisons constructed post-colonial era. With the exception of Carrera and the Golden Grove convict prisons, all facilities now contain a remand section with varying standards of conditions. But in the Tobago prison, the Port of Spain lockup, and the remand jail, archaic infrastructure has transcended decades of wear and tear, leaving inmates crammed into cells that can only accommodate a few and battling conditions much harsher than the outside.
How long have you been in a cell without lights?
9 years and something.
How does it affect you?
I was trying not to make it a study, but we don't have plenty problems on my mind already. I don't know. It's just with the court, so we are trying to make it a study now. But it's really a problem. It's really can't read.
For inmates like Marlon Jordan at the Port of Spain remand section, it is difficult to find solace in the one book that brings him peace, the Holy Bible.
I want to go so bad, as I tell you, that it affect me plenty. But I just had to pray and just hold a Bible and ask God to cut and clear for me now.
There are hundreds like Jordan who long for quick justice, but only 46% of murder cases at the High Court and 43.7% at the magistrates were disposed of in 2018. For many, the horrible conditions of remand would seem bearable if only they had a date to go home.
I frustrated my child and child mother send a message to him, the children are nothing. I have 2 children out there. You understand? I charge with 4 other men. Right? It is alleged that I do this crime. You understand? And I waited 3 years for a start. From day 1 I come in jail, my lawyer ready. You understand? I waiting for a start, low court, and then it might take me 5 years before I get the start. And when I get the start, I hear next exercises.
And then what happens to your children?
5 more years.
And then what happens to your children?
The fatherless, nothing to go on for them. My child mother to go shoe and handle, she says. You understand? To make ends meet. And my son, I out of life, when I make he come a criminal.
Inmates held on remand at different facilities are presumed innocent, and they all say that they are. They are men behind bars charged with DUIs and non-payment of child maintenance, housed among persons accused of some of the most heinous crimes. The Trinidad and Tobago Prison Service is currently unable to separate inmates according to classification of crime due to a lack of space and resources. Every year, the Ministry of National Security is allocated approximately 6% of the more than $50 billion budget. Prisons receive roughly $120 million, of which $16 million alone is spent feeding inmates per year. According to the math, the service has to feed roughly 4,000 inmates 3 times a day. It means the quality of food is often edible as opposed to palatable. When CNC3 News visited the remand prison at Golden Grove, the diet was rice, lentil, peas, fried fish and morbi. Remandees told us they were eating to survive.
They offer me a piece of fish to taste, huh? Yeah? So let me see, get all this. So, thank you. It's not bad. It's not too bad.
But the rice and thing boil good. The rice and boil, but the rice boil halfway.
Infrastructure at the Port of Spain prison is difficult to maneuver. Remandees say its current design does little to support their presumed innocence, for in 2020, inmates on remand still use slop pails where available.
That part don't miss that part real trip.
So you go show me.
This is night defecation. You need to get night defecation.
So you take a Guardian. What newspaper is that?
I will go and defecate.
Right, okay, that's
This
this
is
Catholic newspaper.
Right. So defecation, that's a paper. Defecate on this in the night. Fold up that. Done you folding up that.
Then you pay it, man. Tired.
Till the next day. The next morning. So overnight, that's your situation overnight.
How does that
So
make
if
you?
that ain't a primitive 2019, if that ain't a primitive thing, I don't know what is primitive thing.
How does that make you feel when you have?
When I'm supposed to be assumed innocent until proven guilty, that treatment for innocent man 5 years? What's that? This is 2019 in an oil-rich country like this. Men still doing that on gazette paper in the night for 4 other men. How are you supposed to feel about as an innocent man?
While the pails are emptied on a daily basis, the stench of remand remains one of the most distinct odors ever inhaled. The scent of sweat combined with urine, feces, and deteriorating conditions clings to your clothes, hair, and skin. Attempts to drench the smell with disinfectant fail to mask the reality of the conditions. The inmates' lungs unfortunately adjust as they live, sleep, and eat within the parameters of discomfort. Beds on remand are few and far between. The overcrowding situation forces those without a mattress to sleep on cold, hardened floors. Some use cardboard, others pieces of carpet and thin linen sheets to separate their faces from the concrete ground. Inmates who cannot find space on the ground look to the air as they hang hammocks and handmade slings from the cell ceiling with the hopes of finding a space to rest their heads where their hearts, minds, and hopes remain in turmoil. Akili Charles spent 9 years on remand before a new magistrate assigned to his case following the Marcia Ayres Caesar fiasco found there was insufficient evidence to prosecute him and 5 childhood friends for the murder of Russell Antwine.
You won your case, but at the end of the day, it shouldn't take this long because in magistrate court, your matter hasn't really started yet. The prosecutor, the magistrate, whoever, they're just trying to see if your matter has enough evidence to go on trial. So you basically trying to tell me that it took you from 2010 to 2019 just to see if my matter had enough evidence to go on trial. So how long the trial going to take?
Charles, a practicing Buddhist, tried very hard to stay focused while battling prison conditions. He enrolled in every possible academic and self-development class at the Port of Spain remand. He obtained a 1 in English, a 3 in maths, and various certifications to prep him for the outside. but he admits his daughter was the only thing that kept him going.
That was the hardest part. But it was the hardest part, but yet still, that was the main thing that kept you focused, knowing you have to go home to her. So every day I called her, and that way it was. And sometimes the officers will bust down, they will get your phone, and you have to get back a phone.
The simplest of phones can cost an inmate $1,100, while an Android can fetch $3,000. Not everyone would be able to get one, he explained, for it depended on connections both in and outside of prison.
How easy is it to get a phone in there?
Not really easy, it depends on who you know. It's not really easy at all. Some people wouldn't get it. It's not that easy.
When you say they wouldn't get it, is it because they don't have the relationships with officers that...
It's not officers alone. You might have the one or two, but mostly it's not really officers. Like police pain, for example, they throw stuff over the wall. It's all kind of different ways to get things in. You know what I mean? But it's not really officers most of the time.
Inmates complain the communication facilities at the prisons, particularly on remand, are grossly inadequate. Access is either through prison welfare, monitored payphones, and limited to hours when relatives or children are not at home or available. Many tell us the conditions would be tolerable if only the judicial system delivered justice. The promised effects of recent legislative, administrative, and procedural interventions is of little or no consolation for remand prisoners, many of whom have already had to endure the effects of the dysfunctional system. The impact on inmates and officers have been detrimental. In our next piece, we take a look at how one former prisons commissioner tried to change the system and how an incoming is carrying on the legacy.